Evening YouTube, Tired Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Before I get into the video here, which is going to be an interesting one, rather lengthy, I'm going to warn you in advance. Go make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you've been watching for a while. If you're new here, same deal. But we are doing a weekly forecast along with looking at the potential severe weather down the line this week. So this is going to be pretty much leading into Friday. There are 3 days in particular that are of interest to me right now. Mainly it's going to be Tuesday and Wednesday, but Thursday, while it has no area, I do have some, not necessarily, I don't have full confidence that this will change, but I've been seeing a lot of signals that may lead to a slight risk, if not higher. There's still a lot that has to be hashed out with that, though. So we'll go ahead and take a look at these first two slight risk, and then we'll get into Thursday a little bit. And then as we close in on that day, depending on how model trends go, I'll get into greater detail with it. But for right now, this is the main situation we have right now. We have our slight risk here Tuesday that stretches from Dallas over to Abilene and as far south as even San Antonio. Marginal risk even stretches all the way towards Colorado here, New Mexico, and parts of the Oklahoma panhandle here. You also have a secondary slight risk that's developed, not slight risk, but marginal risk that's developed across parts of Florida. Yet again, we've been seeing multiple events across Florida. There was even a tornado report today over there. I actually forgotten where because I've had a super long day. But between Melbourne and Miami is where this marginal risk exists. Main threats with those are damaging wind and hail, just like with this setup, but all hazards are possible across Texas tomorrow night. We even have a slight risk for a tornado threat, which is indicated by the 5% region over here. Then here's our wind and hail threat. Hail threat is the greatest danger so far with its hatched risk that stretches from just on the western fringes of Dallas all the way towards San Antonio with the 15% area. The hatched risk, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know, indicates a threat for significant hail, which would be hail that's greater than 2 inches in diameter. So basically bigger than golf ball size. We go towards day 3 now. This is pretty much indicative of a stalled out system. And we're going to see severe weather over the same areas again on Wednesday. I'm a little more concerned about Wednesday than I am Tuesday as of right now. I've been seeing a lot of indicators that maybe this could be a much more significant day on all fronts. All hazards are possible with this yet again. And ironically also, there is another marginal risk over Florida. This time it stretches further to the north, almost coinciding in a way with this setup here, which I find interesting, but all hazards are possible across Texas yet again. And this also starts to stretch into the Arklatex here and even starting to stretch onto the southernmost fringes of Oklahoma here as we're riding the Oklahoma and Texas line. No hazard percentages yet to go with because we're still less than 48 hours out, but we'll probably see an update tomorrow. And then day 4 through 8. Days 4 and 5 in particular are predictability too low. 6, 7, and 8 are all potential too low. Day 4 is the one I'm the most interested in. Potentially, maybe even out of all 3 days. Not entirely sure. Because there's still a lot of model disagreement, but I'm thinking that there could be another big severe weather day. This time maybe even across the Dixie Alley region here. So a lot of stuff going on. We'll see some indicators on that from the models that we're going to look at tonight. Speaking of the models, let's go ahead and get into that. So here we are looking at current time with the Euro. This is OZ. Very warm across the southwestern reaches of the U.S. here. A little bit of cold air towards the higher elevations. We still have some pretty decent warm air set up across the central U.S. and the south. As we get into the evening hours, temperatures are getting a little bit cooler. It's definitely a lot cooler in comparison to last week and the weeks prior, where we were having 60 degrees as lows and 80 degree plus days, especially across the south. But now we're starting to get into a little bit more average temperatures, or maybe even a little bit below. Nonetheless, here, still getting into those 60s and 70s across a large part of the south. This is still an adequate warm sector for severe weather. And as time goes on, we're going to see this persist even all the way into Friday morning, especially across the southeast. Hence why I have my concerns still for a potential severe event. One thing that also kind of throws me a little bit, and of course this is with the Euro. Euro hasn't really been great with severe weather this year. But one thing to also keep an eye on with the Euro is the fact that there's not a huge temperature contrast on any of these days. GFS and the NAM are the main ones that will show those increased temperature contrasts. And I'll go ahead and like maybe post those probably tomorrow just to give an idea of what's going on. But for the most part, we're still dealing with a sufficient warm sector. There are moisture returns with this region. We'll look at some other models for that to hone in on the severe weather threat. But we're mainly, the goal with us looking at the Euro here is to get far enough to where we can cover every area. The only really cold area that I could see as of right now, of course, is over towards the higher elevations of the northwest, towards the Rockies. But look what happens on Tuesday, though. We do see that cold air starting to sneak in from the north, and this is what's going to end up causing our below average temperatures to start out the month of May. If you want to get further details on that, go ahead and look at my spring outlook video, not my spring outlook video, but my May outlook video. I don't know why I keep getting that mixed up, but my May outlook video that I made this morning, link to that will be in the top right corner, by the way. But this is what we have going on with the temperatures. We'll take a look at the precipitation as we drag this on, and then we'll get into the severe weather side of things. It's not much of a winter side with this system, with this upcoming system, but down the line we do have to keep an eye on things. So there is a little bit of wintry weather that can be expected here from the Euro as we head towards Tuesday night across Colorado. But as time goes on, we'll start to see these storms begin to fire across Texas. And even though the Euro hasn't been great with severe weather this year, we do see a little bit of activity over here. Not going to look at any soundings with this model, relatively pointless. But we do get an idea of what the moisture is going to look like. And then Wednesday's a little bit more widespread severe weather, a little bit more coverage. Still not a great indicator of what the atmospheric potential actually has in store, possibly. But we do see a little bit of increased active weather across the southeast as we head towards Thursday in two different sectors across the Gulf Coast and then across parts of northern Mississippi and Alabama. Then as we head into Friday, we'll see this start to progress off to the southeast, especially over towards the early morning for right now, and then we'll probably watch this head off coast by Friday afternoon. Alright, so now we're going to go over to the NAM 3 kilometer. We're mainly going to be looking at severe weather parameters more than anything at this point. Because when we look at the trough, there's really not a lot going on with that right now. But basically, this is what we have going on. This is looking towards the upper levels of the atmosphere. We do have something that pops up here, but it really starts to deepen more so on Wednesday. This is actually the best the trough has looked in any runs that I've seen so far. Even so, the trough isn't the most impressive thing I've seen. Definitely nothing compared to some of the stuff we saw in March and April and early April. But nonetheless, we're still getting close to that 60 to 70 knot range, and this is probably going to deepen as we go into the next couple scans here as we get towards OOZ, getting towards 60 knots. Not bad for a high level trough, but you want to see it get to about maybe 70 or 80 knots when you're looking for severe weather. It's usually a very good signal by this point. We go towards Thursday, and this is where things kind of get interesting, but we're also out of range for it. We'll see this probably start to deepen a bit more as we get towards Thursday afternoon across the southeast. Question will be along the lines more of, will there be a short wave at this this altitude here at 700 meters to really get those storms going here. It's always towards the mid levels where we have to watch the most. Well, the mid levels and of course the lower levels, but the mid levels is a big influential factor here. I do see a little pocket over here where we're getting up to about 40 knots. Again, not the most impressive kinematics we've seen, but nonetheless, there's something there. And then as we go towards Thursday into Thursday morning here, we do see this little area really start to pick up here. Could be an overnight threat possibly. I'm kind of leaning towards no, but that's interesting because when we look towards Thursday afternoon like I'm talking about, that's where things really start to get interesting as far as model runs are concerned. So if we see this signal beginning to pop up in the early hours of Thursday, the question will become, what does that mean for this area over here towards Dixie Alley? So one other thing that we're going to look at here real quick before we go to the moisture returns is actually we're going to go ahead and look at the low-level jet. Low-level jet is what a lot of people will consider the tornado juice, in which it is. But if you actually look at the values on the low-level jet for this setup, until recently, it wasn't really that impressive to me. Like the timing when these storms are set to fire, there's not really a lot available for these storms to work with here as far as the low-level jet. And it's not like it's the most impressive values that we've seen either. We're only getting up to about 30 knots. We're barely scraping the surface here. Wednesday, of course, looks a little bit better, but even so, not by that much. But no, again, just like what we saw, that uptick in in pretty much all levels of the atmosphere as far as this trough is concerned, and maybe a little bit of a jet streak trying to develop, that could lead to an increased concern for severe weather for Thursday. Like I said, there's still a lot of model discrepancy. If we look at a bunch of other models, it'll take all night for me to do that and explain it all. But simply put, this is something that we're going to have to monitor very closely. And this is not being talked about by a lot of people. So this is a good time to look at, whether it's myself or any other YouTubers that are talking about weather here, to stay a leg up on this potential severe weather event. The storm system probably is just now really starting to form here, so still hears a lot of hearsay as to what's going to happen here. But one thing that I am very confident in is the fact that we're going to have pretty solid moisture returns on all 3 days. Basically with the moisture returns, anything that's above 60 degree in dew points is a pretty sufficient moisture return. Moisture return for severe weather. And we start to see the early phases of that Tuesday night into Wednesday. We're getting 60, 61 degree dew points. We'll get a look at a sounding here for Tuesday night. Marginal tornado threat. Again, it's that low-level jet parameters are just not that impressive. Storm slightly elevated too. There's a weak cap there, but it looks like it breaks by this point here. But the numbers are more than suitable enough to produce severe weather, maybe even a brief tornado. Again, the numbers really begin to improve more as we look towards Wednesday. Look at that 70 degree point, this 70 degree area here, and the purple begin to develop. This is towards 22Z. And hit this little point right here. And this hordeograph and these other parameters look a little bit better. There's not much of a capping inversion there. There's a little bit of a wet bulb that's developed here. Maybe a weak cap towards the mid levels of the atmosphere. But nonetheless, an environment that's a little bit more suitable for tornadoes is possible. And who's to say that that can't be upticked, so to speak. So we do have to keep an eye on that there. And now we're going to get into more slightly more complex side of severe weather. We're going to mainly look at the wind shear and the convective available potential energy, or CAPE, as I've called it. It's my Discord going off. But simply put, For all three of these days, and this is what the main concern is as to why there's severe weather potential, is just there's plenty of energy in the atmosphere. It's not as abundant on Tuesday, but even so, this little pocket over here where we're above 2,000 joules per kilogram is more than sufficient enough to get some storms to fire if they break through that cap. We'll go ahead and click on this area here, and we'll get an idea of what's to be expected. Elevated storm, nonetheless though, the low-level hordeograph here looks mildly impressive. And then the other parameters in place would allow for tornadoes. I really lean towards a hail threat with this one, just as the Storm Prediction Center is calling. In fact, even if you look on the sounding analogs, you can see the significant hail right here, possibly even up to baseball size. Again, those values can be overdone, so it's not a guarantee that it'll happen, but it's definitely something to keep note of. We get towards Wednesday night. Look what happens here. Impressive cape right here, up to about 3,000 joules per kilogram. This is what you would consider to be an explosive environment. A little bit of a crazier deal with the hordeograph at the low levels here. It's a little bit more rooted to the surface than the last one, albeit not by much. Nonetheless here, right along where this dry line is, right around where that convective energy is available, there's a potential for a few tornadoes to form, maybe even a couple of supercells. And then as we get towards the end of this, watch how this cape starts to oddly push off to the west here, but a new area of cape begins to develop over here in the early morning hours of Thursday. Definitely something I'm going to be keeping a close eye on. Over the next day, I think things will be very telling in regards to Thursday as to what we could see or what we may not see. So that being said, let's go ahead and look at the bulk shear. The bulk shear is going to be a key component to any sort of tornadic development. This is kind of looking at the wind shear at multiple levels of the atmosphere. And part of the reason why we're still concerned about a tornado threat is that the bulk shear as a whole is sufficient enough across this region in the purple where we're still getting up to about 50 to 60 knots. The directional shear is I think is going to be more of a key component than speed shear because there's just so little of it. Nonetheless, we still get up to about 60 knots total in bulk shear. Wow, look at that lapse rate right there. That's crazy. Storm's still elevated, and that's going to be a big factor. And then also there's a really strong capping inversion value right here of negative 141. That's still something that we need to keep a close eye on because that could limit storm development. I think as of right now, there's a brief window for these storms to develop. Then after that, I think as the night goes on, I think we're going to start to lose the potential for any sort of supercellular development. But any storms that do develop, though, will have incredible hail potential and maybe a tornado threat. Again, like I said, Tuesday is not really looking like the main event. Might be Wednesday or even Thursday, which could be a sleeper. So here we go looking at 23Z. Here is the setup across parts of Oklahoma. Here's the bulk shear across Oklahoma, looking a little bit more impressive, but dynamics are a little bit too far to the north here. It's really towards Dallas or maybe just north of there on the fringe of the Oklahoma-Texas line where I'm kind of looking towards an increased tornado threat here, albeit still not a very cut out and very impressive tornado threat. Still one nonetheless. And this is a lot better rooted to the surface in comparison to that last hordeograph, last sounding storm relative velocities. Weaker cap inversion, so there's not much that would really stop this if this were to come to fruition. And that's still a big if. Nonetheless, as we go towards Thursday, we start to see some of that bulk shear begin to move off to the east a bit. So a lot of things that are still in question here for Thursday. But if this goes into, if this comes into fruition, it could be a big deal. Now, the last thing we're going to look at is the SIGTOR here, the significant tornado parameter. So there was a sounding that I saw earlier today around Wednesday night that had my interest, that piqued my interest a bit. And then also there was something that popped up over here earlier today that I was interested in. That was during the lunchtime run, and actually there it is again, where we did have a PDS tornado signal right here. Still slightly elevated, and that's what kind of has me on the fence about this setup for tomorrow. Because, again, a lot of these storms are going to struggle to route to the surface in comparison to tomorrow's setup. But nonetheless, conditions could be right across this part of Texas here. Maybe a strong tornado. Do I think that they would go all the way up to an enhanced risk for this? As of right now, I would lean towards no. Then interestingly enough, it actually intensifies as we go into the evening on Tuesday here. But look at that. Some more elevated storm now. And then on top of that, the PDS tornado signal's gone with that as well. You can't really read into those too much. You have to just look at the parameters as a whole sometime before going with, oh gosh, this is going to be apocalyptic event. It's not always like that. So this is probably the best choreograph I've seen, but again, elevated. It's the only issue with Tuesday setup that I really have. A lot of these storms look like they're going to be elevated. But it looks like it looks like if these storms can route to the surface, which is going to be a key component, there could be a big time issue in play here. And then here's what I saw from the model run later this afternoon, just as I was getting off of work. This one's more rooted to the surface, and this one slightly more believable, where we could have maybe a strong tornado with this too. Again, there's still some fail parameters with this, so not something that I'm gonna say I'm 100% confident on happening. But we do see this persist all the way into late Wednesday night into Thursday morning, and then we're probably going to see these parameters move off to the east. But a lot of moving parts here. This could be a long week. It'll be interesting to see how things develop. If things get really crazy, of course, I'm going to be looking to go live. Hopefully you guys will be able to join in. But that being said here, that's the end of this video. I know I've been rambling for a while. It's been a while since I feel like it's been a while since I made a video this long. Nonetheless, though, I'm going to go ahead and call this one and get ready for work tomorrow. But thank you for being here. Appreciate you guys as always. And also hit that like button if you're new here or if you've been watching for a while. If you like the content, you know what to do, hit that sub button, turn that bell on to get notifications to every video. Share this video to anyone you may think finds this useful, and of course, comments are always welcome. That being said, it's been Tire Metal Weatherman. Enough rambling. You guys have a good night. I will see you soon. Take care.